This was me 5 years ago. I'd just started medical school. I spent most of my days going from lectures to work to staying up until late, trying to learn more information than I'd ever imagined. And this is when I realized something uncomfortable about myself. The more I disliked a lecturer, the better I became at that topic. Now, at first, I thought I was overcompensating for what I believed to be terrible teaching, but then I realized it wasn't about them at all. I was behaving very differently in these lessons. You see, if I loved a subject and a lecturer, I would be a perfect student. I'd be bringing my iPad and making notes in the class, having revision schedules and revision notes. But if I disliked a lecturer, I was a brat. I would sit down, sometimes with my legs and my arms crossed, and criticize almost everything that they were saying. And yet, it turned out that those were the subjects that in the end I understood the best, learned the fastest, and performed the best in. It seemingly made no sense. And it took me years to realize that there was a specific mindset and perspective that I now use intentionally all the time in order to learn things faster and better and focus more. I call this critical listening, and I will be explaining it and breaking it down in detail today using the medical topic of glomerulonephritis as an example, because lots of you agreed it's a difficult topic to learn, and you can of course use this for anything else, but I'm just going to jump straight into it. The very first step to critical listening and ideal learning for me is to have a very, very focused mindset. And I know this sounds super vague. I find it really annoying when people tell me to focus. It's like telling me to be smarter or to be faster. Unless there's specific guidance or advice, I don't find this helpful. And I'm going to explain how I do it in a way that works for me every single time. It will sound quite cringe and uncomfortable, but it genuinely helps. So I'm not going to apologize for it. Basically, if I'm sat in a lecture thinking that someone is there to teach me, they might as well be dancing around naked as they explain things, and I still wouldn't be able to focus on them. But what I think of when I'm in a lecture is not that I am a student and that is the teacher and I'm being taught things. What I think is that I have a job, and in front of me, I have an expert who's talking about something, and I need to translate and be critical of everything that they are saying and process it in a way that I can give it to someone who is an idiot, does not care about this subject, and does not know anything about this subject, myself. So in this instance, I am not the student. In this game in my mind, I am the critical translator who takes and processes this information. On top of this, I want to be as mean as I can in my mind. I want to tap into that energy that I have, and you might relate to this, for someone who I completely dislike. If there's someone that you find really annoying and they're saying something, I don't know if you've been in that situation where you are hanging on to every single word because you are waiting for them to slip up and say something that doesn't make sense, to prove in your mind that they don't know what they're talking about. This is how I perceive what the lecturer is saying. I am assuming that they might be confused. I know that they're the experts, but I'm just going to check, is what they're saying, does it make sense? Is it consistent? Does it tie in with everything else? Even though I cannot check the facts of what they are saying because I don't know the topic, they know what they're talking about. I can check their logic, if they are explaining things properly, if there are any gaps or any issues within the knowledge, and this is what I am going to be focusing on. In this way, I'm fully critical and I'm fully switched on, and I am assessing their ability to explain and to teach. And two things, I know this sounds really, really mean, but for perspective, I am one of 400 students in this room just sitting there. They don't see me, they don't know who I am, and this is all just happening in my head as a way to motivate myself. It's not personal against the lecturer. I'm sure they're absolutely great. And the second thing is, criticism is such a good way to learn because, for example, if I describe assessing something, paying attention to it, comparing with how it fits within your own framework of the world and how the world works, and therefore giving feedback on what the issues with it are and how it works, Is that criticizing something, or is it learning something? It's very, very similar. So I want to lean into this because it gives me more motivation. As soon as I've switched myself on in this perspective where I'm sitting down thinking, fine, you have me here for an hour, show me what you can teach and say about this topic and I'll see how good you are at doing it. Using this sort of mindset, I can then get into the learning itself. So there are 3 main steps that I do every time with critical listening. The first one is to avoid whiplash, and this is so important. What I call whiplash is the fact that a lot of lecturers will just jump into a topic straight in, no warning, just completely assume that you know what they're talking about and what the context is and what the subject is, and every next sentence that they're saying, you're just sat there being beaten around by information going, oh my god, what is happening, where am I? And it takes so long to orientate myself. So what I do every time when a lecture starts, either while the lecturer is just like fumbling about with the slides or the presentation or the computer, or even in the few seconds when I'm sitting down, I am thinking, what is the context here? And I want to find as many associations as possible in my mind already. So using glomerulonephritis as an example, even as a first-year medical student, I would have gone glomerulus, that's a part of a kidney, nephritis, nephron, that's like, again, kidney. So the glomerulus of the kidney, and itis is inflammation. So there's these 3 things. So I'll think kidney, blood pressure, edema, I'll think urine, I'll think itis, infection, immune system, being immunocompromised, not using contrast in x-rays. So I find all the words that can come up and try to predict almost what are the elements of the thing that we are going to be talking about. And this is so important because it kind of primes my brain already for where this new information will sit, rather than kind of just connecting it to absolutely nothing in my head. As a 4th-year medical student, I'll probably come up with a lot more things when I'm thinking of glomerulonephritis, but even in the very first instance, there will be things there. Even if you're completely not a medic and I say you're going to watch a lecture on glomerulonephritis, you could probably get started with the fact that, oh, my next door neighbor's daughter, she's a doctor. That's one association. Or that time you went to hospital, or like medication or a cannula or an IV line. These are things that can come to mind, and they will be helpful if you identify them in the very first instance. If I had a lecture on astrophysics, I'd probably think Matthew McConaughey, and that would be something more than thinking from absolutely nowhere. Second step is where the active work actually begins and the lecturer starts talking. So at this point, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to separate the logical backbone of what they're saying from the fluff of what they are saying. So as soon as they start explaining something that I realize is important, for example, in this case, I want to understand what the hell glomerulonephritis is. This is the first tab that I'm opening in my mind. What is this thing? What does it mean? How does it work? And in this case, I am going to be waiting within everything that they are saying for them to answer this question. And every time that they prompt new things that are important, that opens a new tab in my mind. So when I'm separating the answer to my open question with the fluff is going to be the things that in your mind, you're just going, yeah, just get to the point. Like when you're listening to a lawyer or when you're listening to a politician and they're just adding words to the question, but you're thinking, I just want the points here, the main backbone of what you're saying. So let's say the lecturer in this case starts explaining glomerulonephritis and he starts talking about basement membrane, the capillary epithelium. I'm like, I don't care what's actually happening. So here I'm like, skip in my mind. I'm hearing it, but I have this question. Where's my answer? Finally, he mentioned something relevant, which is staph and strep, which are infection, and that could be a cause for glomerulonephritis. This is relevant information. So this is my open tab of what glomerulonephritis is. And once I've heard staph and strep, I am going to say glomerulonephritis is an inflammation of the kidney caused by a bacterium. So this is my hypothesis. If you know about glomerulonephritis, this is not true, but this is all the information I have until now, and this is the answer that I am giving myself. It's very, very important that as the lecture is continuing, I have continuous hypotheses. So I'm not just passively listening to what the lecturer is saying, I'm jumping to conclusions immediately. They say something, I jump to a conclusion. And when they disprove it with information in the future, I change my conclusion. This is a much more active process than waiting for them to finish, because there's actually a lot that says that when people are speaking or when people are writing things, they come up with conclusions at the end of everything that they are saying. While when we are consuming information, either reading or hearing it, and actually being intentional with it, we are coming up with conclusions along the way. This is a process called chunking, and it's much more effective to do chunking. Also, people like Minto have said that formulating conclusions about what you're reading while you're reading can be more effective in understanding the process that is going on. So it helps me keep my attention, and it helps me be active about what is being said by formulating conclusions as the lecture is continuing. So in this case, this is my hypothesis. I'll keep this tab open and see if the lecturer says anything else that will disprove this, and I'll just continue. Later in the lecture, it's mentioned that things like lupus or other autoimmune conditions can also induce glomerulonephritis or be associated with it even without a previous infection. So in this case, this hypothesis that I made is now altered, and I'm saying, okay, it's not just an infection, it can also be caused by a malfunctioning of the autoimmune system. And then I'm thinking, okay, what do I know about this? And as the lecturer is potentially talking about something else or going into details that are not relevant to me immediately, I am thinking autoimmune system, self-attack, is the IgA. So I've opened a new tab, is the physiological mechanism of glomerulonephritis, IgA, and I keep this open in my mind. These are the things that I sometimes will write down. So if a lecturer has not immediately answered a question that has come up in this new tab chunking process in my brain, these are the things that I will be writing down and go, IgA, question mark. And this is the notes that I'll be taking rather than specific information. It's especially valuable if I come up with wrong conclusions, because this means that I can adjust and change what I'm learning in a way that's much more effective. So for example, if I'm hearing this and I think, people with an affected immune system, so immunocompromised patients or patients with HIV, must suffer less from this because their immune system is less likely to attack themselves, for example. And if this is proven later to be false, one, I'm more likely to remember it because it's not only new information, but it's something that I made a mistake on. And secondly, it opens up a whole bunch of automatic questions, as in, I came to this conclusion, what did I not understand along the way that didn't make sense that I need to adjust also? As I'm coming up with these conclusions and statements, a lot of the things that the lecturer will say next will just make perfect sense to me, even with a very basic familiarity with the topic. Mentioning things like issues with urine, hematuria, edema, this is all something that I could have easily predicted if there was an issue with the kidney in the first case. And as the lecture progresses, I'm also predicting things in my mind. What are the tests that I would run? What do I think are the outcomes for these patients? How would we cure these patients? How would we follow up these patients? What age groups are most likely to be effective? These are questions that I think of automatically as soon as we're starting a lecture, we're having a condition explained to us. And these are things that I am a lot better at doing now, obviously in my fourth year than I was in my first year, because I do these in the spaces of fluff. Fluff is very hard to identify the earlier on you are in a subject, because you just don't know what you should know and what you shouldn't know. But this is a combination of what you are being taught and how much you need to memorize and learn, and also how much you need to know about yourself. For example, I know I'm really bad with learning numbers and new words, so when I'm in a lecture and I'm just being given like a list of tests or given a list of different conditions or a list of different definitions for something, I won't even listen to this because I'm just not going to memorize it anyway. This is a space for me to process what I've just heard and predict what is coming up rather than focus on what is being said. If suddenly they're saying, this is the glomerular filtration rate that we expect for these patients and these are our guidelines, I'm not listening. I'm thinking of something else because I know I can study this when I need to for the exam. This is not important. What's important is me actually understanding what parts of the immune system are involved, what parts of the kidney are being damaged, how these are being cured, how do we measure them, what would a histological slide of this look like. These are the things I'm trying to predict and find them talk about later, rather than is it 53 or 24? Nobody cares about that. So this is something that in the beginning is going to be hard, but later as you progress, you're kind of going to know what the exams will ask and not ask, and what you're supposed to know and not supposed to know. If you've just started a subject and it's the very, very beginning, I would keep things very, very simple and make sure that when you end the lecture, you know how to answer in the most basic sense what was being taught that day. So just the core backbone of the information, even if you have no extra fluff on it, that's absolutely fine. A core genuine understanding that sits in the right place of your brain and connects to the other parts of information, your perspective of the world, is so invaluable, and you'll be actually able to answer a lot on this topic and learn and build it up so much easier. If you're more advanced in that subject, it's going to be a lot easier to open a lot more tabs at once. This is also why I'm not writing during these lectures. I'm just sat staring at the lecture and really thinking in my mind. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that I'm thinking. In this case, I might go, what's glomerulonephritis? What's nephrotic syndrome? What's nephrotic syndrome? What's the difference between them? What part of the immune system is involved? Do I need to do dialysis? When is dialysis indicated? How do immunocompromised patients react to these sort of things? How soon or how late after infection does this usually happen? How does it present differently in children and adults? How is it treated differently in children and adults? is there any individual things that are different for children that I'd seen? These are questions that would be coming up in my mind in a more advanced state. But this is the level that you'll very easily get to if you keep doing this sort of process during the lecture itself. The other benefit to this is that if you are writing down core logical questions and finding holes in the reasoning of the lecturer, because very often they're professionals, so they're just used to this sort of stuff. That's all they talk about is the kidney, for example. So they might miss out on explaining very essential things that as a second year, third year, fifth year medical student, you might not know that well. So when there's a hole, when they make a jump and you just write that question down and go, wait, why does this part of the kidney being affected lead automatically to this sort of effect on the body? That could be a question that you can ask the lecturer later. And because you have this question, when you're doing revision, you can only use the core logical questions that you had. And this is much better recall than having recall on numbers or figures or guidelines or things that are much more easy to look up on. You're always focused on the logic of the subject that you are studying. In my first year, where we had in-person lectures, I would always walk up to my lecturer after and ask them the questions that I had written down, and that just kind of resolved everything within that lesson. So the lecture would be over and I had a perfect-ish understanding most of the time of what we were talking about, and that was 90% of my learning done. I had to, of course, do all of my revision and all of my extra studying later, but my learning was finished. I understood the things that I was talking about because I made sure that things connected, that I knew what it was about, and that made logical sense. And I tried to never waste the lectures, mostly because I had to work quite a bit alongside medical school, so I did not have as much time. So when I wasn't a lecturer and I had to be there, I made sure I made the best out of that time. So the majority of my learning was and understanding was actually done then. And this was super, super valuable. I would really recommend trying to do this process. Very easy to understand, I think, quite active and tiring to do, but super, super effective. And this is something that I do not only with my lectures, but also what's happening in my personal life, despite it probably being a really exhausting thing. So a great resource to use instead is 80,000 hours, which are completely free. So it's firstly mind-blowing, and secondly, they're very kindly sponsoring this video, so I would really, really recommend them. A bunch of people at 80,000 Hours organization have come together and done this very critical thinking on what we are doing and the impact of our actions on our personal future and the world's future together in a group of endless resources that are absolutely invaluable. If you are alive today and have a career today and are the kind of person that is interested in the reality of what we are doing and the direction that we are going in, this is absolutely essential, I think, to stay in touch with as we progress. There is an absolutely free guide that you can get with my link down below in the description that will discuss the impact of different careers and how they can affect your personal life, your morals, your ethics and future. But also there is a great podcast that I would listen to. The very recent one is on ChatGPT and other sorts of AI and how they will impact our jobs. And this is something that I've been reading also in another book recently. So it's super, super interesting. I would really, really recommend staying in touch with the progression and the ethics of our future and careers as we are going forward in life. So there'll be a link below if you do want to check that out. Using my link, you'll be able to sign up for their newsletter and be sent over a free copy of their in-depth career guide, which is an incredible space to start thinking with some professional support about some of the bigger questions in your life. And otherwise, if you made it so far, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Be kind to yourself and others, and don't believe everything you think. Thanks. Bye.